Ajayi, welcome to Listen Loudly. What an absolute joy it is to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm well. It's a joy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I know you as an incredible woman of many, many talents, helped by your sister posting about your accolades. I know that you don't. Which led me to go, I have to have you on the show. So for those who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Well, my name is Ajayi. I am a television showrunner, which is basically a writer, exec producer. I've worked on television shows in the UK and the USA. In the US, shows like How to Get Away with Murder, Inventing Anna on Netflix. And I also created a show for Amazon called Riches, which is also available on ITV in the UK.
Amazing, amazing. And how did you get into that? Did you know that you wanted to do that from the get-go? What was the process?
Routes into media careers are very varied. I mean, the starting point was I loved watching TV, my parents would be like, face your books, and I'd be watching Quantum Leap or Star Trek or like pretty much anything really. I grew up in Edmonton in North London, so there weren't a lot of TV producers or writers that I knew anyway in my neighborhood. So it didn't really seem like a possibility for me. So I studied law at university. I was at Oxford, but I was quite clear very early on I didn't want to be a lawyer. I liked the degree was interesting, and I liked legal shows. I thought I was much more interested in writing a legal show than going to court myself.
Than actually being the legal show, yeah.
Yeah, no, completely. So while I was at university, I started reviewing films and writing a little bit, and basically, as has become my pattern, I just made a decision just before graduation. I was not going to apply for any law jobs. I didn't tell my parents that. I just sort of didn't mention that I hadn't applied for any. I was like, oh, I didn't get any. But meanwhile, I was doing internships, lots of unpaid work at that point to just get experience. And so my first sort of intern job was for a producer in London. And a few months later, after that, I got my first sort of paid job working at the BBC in development. So that was like my first entree in. So at the BBC, I kind of spent 2-3 years learning how television shows are made, what scripts get through, what scripts don't get through, why they work or don't work. And again, a few years later, I was like, I want to write my own shows. I don't want to be helping other people write their scripts. So that's when I made that decision to like leave like a paid staff job and instead became self-employed. But I got my first writing credit on a show called The Story of Tracy Beaker, which was like the flagship show on CBBC at that point. And then I did like the soaps, the Hollyoaks, EastEnders, Casualty. So that was kind of my foot in the door. That was really children's drama.
What was it that made you decide, I now don't want to work on anybody else's stuff. I want to write my own. Why was that?
Honestly, I think that had always been the plan. I'd always had stories in my head. I always wanted to put myself and the world as I saw it on the page. But it's just, I often, if an ambition or an aspiration or goal is very big, I think I break it up into steps. So I didn't know how to become a paid writer, but I did know that I could learn how people write and how people get their scripts. So it's just kind of a stepping stone, really. But along the way, all the skills I learned about other people's scripts, about why some of them got greenlit and others didn't, would then serve me when I got to the point. But it's sort of half step into what I really want, just like kind of preparing myself rather than like an immediate deep dive, full immersion, just like dipping your toe in until you acclimate to the cool water and then go all in once you understand the lie of the land.
Amazing. And I love that. And I think that getting your foot in the door, that work experience, that working for free, all of that adds such a rich tapestry to the foundation from which you then move forward. So you literally got to know all of those pieces and elements. And I love that you looked at, okay, what made this script work? What made this, all of that, so then that you could apply it to yourself. And many people, I feel, would look over that and think, I've got this great idea. I just need to get it to the right person. But you decided to learn so much of that integrative process along the way, which is of such value.
No, it's of incredible value. I think there's been fair criticism of the media industry insofar as like there's lots of unpaid work and that can be exploitative, and often the amount of unpaid work or internships that is required to get you to where you need to be often favors people who have the financial background to like be able to withstand living in London, you know, not having money to pay rent, but still do all these free jobs where you learn. So I think there are really issues that should always be challenged. But that being said, I do feel like the process is really important, learning all the stuff, because, you know, I made my first show, having worked on lots of people's shows, over 15, 20 years of work, but I made my first show, Riches, a few years ago. And all the experience is how you become the captain of the ship and understand everybody's job and understand how to empower everyone to do their job very well. And there's often these horror stories about showrunners or new showrunners who like get kicked off their own show or lose control of their own show. And I think a lot of that, you know, again, there are bad practices in the business. I don't want to sugarcoat that. But often it's like, if you don't have that deep knowledge, that's why they can get around you. That's why your vision can be like sort of tamped down, because you don't yet have the full language and skills to be able to articulate that. So I think that, you know, nobody loves working for free, but I do feel like those early experiences were my only way to get in, because I didn't know anyone else. And they've served me very, very well.
And so effectively you did what you could with the resources that you had right in front of you. And that was, okay, well, I don't know anybody necessarily. I can't take advantage of nepotism. I just have to wedge my way in and build my own value. And I think that, I know one thing that we were talking about before we recorded was that is often overlooked. Like I said, the value of just getting all of that experience, because we're told, you know your value, know your worth, and that we must do that from the get-go. And I think that is a lifelong process. And it is also a environmental and situational process as well. So, for example, when I started at Peloton, where I'm at now, and I've been there for nearly 4 years, in a way, it didn't matter that I had 18 years of experience in the industry. Yes, that was wonderful. But I had to get to know the lay of the land there and how I could bring those 18 years to that space in a way that felt true to me and in a way that would benefit the platform as well. And so if I had have arrived going, well, come on then, I've got 18 years. Like, why are you not putting, you know, I had to get to know it and earn it at the same time, you know?
No, completely. I feel like, you know, every script, every TV show has its own specific demands. And if you go in thinking because you did that big show, you know this show, you'll be humbled very, very quickly. I think a great deal of humility to step back and think, what is this thing? Now, and similarly, I do understand. I think it's very challenging for new people, younger people entering the business, because they kind of grew up in a landscape where Zuckerberg was a billionaire at 21. They see TikTok stars and YouTube stars who are 14 years old and who have millions. And they're very much a generation that's been taught, they haven't been taught to value experience, because their lived experience is seeing people with no experience, you know, reach the top very, very quickly. But those are outliers. They're extremely extreme outliers, but everyone's comparing themselves to you know, singular people and singular situations. And I think it creates a lot of anxiety almost, because like, if you value experience, if you've come up watching people take the steps and pay their dues, that, you know, that's the journey. But if you don't value experience, you're like, oh my God, I'm 22 and I haven't yet made my millions. And it creates a lot of anxiety, which I don't think is healthy at all. So I think that's important. I also, specifically, I guess, in terms of my industry, in terms of, you know, television, film, creative endeavors, on the one hand, YouTube, social media has democratized information and knowledge in a way that's great. You can watch
Yeah.
Scorsese talk about how he made this film, and you can learn from them. But often I do think younger people, and I certainly learned this when I started hiring staff on my own show and hiring assistants, is they've come up watching, Reese Witherspoon or Viola Davis,
Yeah.
or Emma Thompson talking about how they earned their stripes, how they, protected themselves. And so they're comparing themselves to someone who's a 30-year veteran. They're
Yeah.
comparing the expectations of someone who's earned that with themselves starting out. And I think that can be a burden, and that might not serve you very well, because, Oprah, Viola, Ava, all those people, they didn't wake up and wear like where they are now. They've come up, so I do think there is value in thinking about how you pay your dues, how you make yourself undeniable in the role that you're in. And
Yeah.
that's when people recognize you or you step up. But I do think sometimes everyone's kind of like trying to be at 100, and you're like, you're not yet walking.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
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 Um,
And you also, you just said something there. You're either there or you have to step up. And I think that the timings for that are very, very different for people. And, as you say, you can now watch, masterclass about how the greats do their thing. And again, they're talking about that on those foundational layers, number one. But I think that I've always wanted to say to people, and this is what I used to say to other coaches when I was coaching them, don't even follow what I've done, because I'm doing what's unique to me in the environment in which I've grown and the experience which I have. Like, that's mine to own. You have to be your own blueprint, because
yeah. Yeah.
you could follow somebody else's, but you don't, again, you're not formulated in the same lab as them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
all of those variables that came together to make them and their connections and all of that are very different. My desire is always to get people really curious about themselves, about their process. Of course, learn from others. Of course, they can save you some time, but the real value is in the step ups and the slip ups that you make, and your process of, okay, what am I going to do about that, and how am I going to move forward from this, and how does that inform what I'm doing tomorrow, in 5 years, in 10 years,
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. It's sort of twofold. We talk a lot about like the absence of representation in so many areas of people of color, of women. And I've often said that's factually correct, but also maybe it's because of the job I do. I'm endlessly curious about other people's processes, how they got there. I'll be reading biographies. You can learn from other people. You can sort of emulate their moves. And when you're starting out, when you're kind of not sure how to do it, that's a great starting point. But ultimately, a screenwriter, I'm terrible at remembering who says things, but a screenwriter once said, write the stories only you know. And I always took that to mean like, we might all be living in the same place, same time, and stuff, but your superpower is the specific way in which you see, experience, and feel things. And so that's why if you and I had the same idea for a rom-com, how you, Jocelyn, see the world and see relationships will dictate how you write that. And mine, if I'm being true to my own instincts and creative impulses and interests, will be different as well. So I think it's like you start with those sort of markers that you're following other people's paths, but ultimately, as the journey develops, it's only meaningful if you're really figuring out what you want to get out of it and what you want to achieve.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think less so maybe for us and more so for that younger generation, as you say, who have seen this quick rise to riches or fame of that technology and, allows that. You're right. There is this anxiety around, why am I not there yet? Which focuses on the outcome, which is, out of reach, and ignores that, okay, well, what am I going to do with the right now, with what I have now?
Yeah, the focus so often is on like the place you're going to. And certainly one of the things I'd say to my assistant, who was always like, how do I become a writer? And I'm like, well, be a great assistant first, because people need to trust that you do the thing you're employed to do, and then they add those responsibilities. Again, I am mindful, because for everything I say, there are like, I also say, but if you want to be a writer, you can be writing. I can't
Yeah.
stop you from doing that. You can be writing. I wrote at night. I wrote on weekends. I sacrificed weekends to go to the British Library and work on my script. So you don't have to wait for permission to do the things you want to do. But similarly, I think people do, and whatever industry you are, people do recognize if you're a superstar at what you do, if you kind of bring a kind of commitment and focus and excellence to what you are employed to do or what you're doing as an intern, and that
Yeah.
they know that'll translate. So I do think
Yes.
it's not a great in any sort of scenario where you feel like the person you're working with, producing with, whatever, is kind of looking over your shoulder to the next thing. And I
Yeah.
suspect that you don't, if you're not really in the moment doing this to the best of your ability, no one's going to believe the next thing's next thing. So I think that's very important, to be very
Yeah.
present to where you are now.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And giving, the best value that you can to the thing that you're doing. And that's brought me to 2 points. The first is your assistant saying to you, how can I do? And you're like, do start writing. Don't
Yeah.
ask for permission. Just start that. That process in itself is going to be wonderful. And also, it comes back to that idea of, and I have, repeat this so many times, but doing what you can with the resources that you have right now. And,
Yeah.
if I think when you do that, you ask less questions of those who you're trying to emulate, or of those who you look up to. So an example that I can use, again, goes back to, coaching other fitness coaches on their careers. And so many times I was asked, what course should I do next? If you are on the gym floor applying what you know to all of your clients that you have, you will see the holes that are in your knowledge that will inform the next course that you should do. You will understand that by doing it, rather than me going, oh, well, I think this is great. How do I know it's going to be great for you? Like, it
Yeah.
has to come from, right, I'm doing all of this, I've applied all of this, where are the holes in my knowledge? That's where that hole is. Let me go down that rabbit hole. Let me see where that takes me. And then the second
Yeah.
piece, as you were saying, that was, my husband and I were having a conversation. It was around sport and teams and all of that. And he was talking about a coach. I can't tell you what sport. I can't tell you from where. But this one coach had said to his team, be excellent at what it requires no talent for. He may have even been referring to Irish rugby, and I could be wrong, so I'll double check that. But anyway, it was basically work on those things that don't require any talent, because they are the pieces that other people won't even think about, and it levels up your whole foundation. Of course, work on your skills, of course, work on your fitness, but to work on those things that other people don't think about, game
Yeah.
changer.
I sometimes struggle with this. It's just trying to have a really clear-eyed assessment of your skills and your capabilities and where you are now. Because if you don't take that moment, take that audit of yourself, you're going to be sort of following other people's paths, or saying, oh, that's a cool course, but actually really saying, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not good at. But you also hit on the thing about talent, and how, what's it, the James Baldwin said, there are lots of talented ruins. It's about the work. It's about the hard work. It's about, and I often repeat this to myself, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Yeah.
If you're talking about writing too much, you need to be writing. That's where you move the dial in that way. And I know there is some value in talking yourself into things. Sometimes I'm like, I'm going to the gym tomorrow, and I like, just saying it sort of starts the process,
Yeah.
but I actually need to pack my bags and go. So I think, again, it's very much about assessing and analyzing where I'm at, where do I want to go, and how do we, bite size that until we get there. When we were talking, I said, in terms of professionally, very early on in my career, I went to this speaker event, and this screenwriter, whose name slips my mind, said, as a writer, you have to find a way to define success that isn't getting paid. And that was very hard to hear because I want to get paid. I like nice things. But I think that was very
Yeah.
helpful because so often as a writer, it's we almost got there and then there's another show a bit similar. It's, oh, we're going to get that. Oh,
Right.
no, we didn't. So, but very early on, before I was even paid, it was, I need to define success for myself. So success became every time I finish a script, that's a check, it's a tick, because that I can control. Sitting down, bum on seat, getting the writing done, finishing a script, that's something that was within my control, and I did that, and that was successful to me. And then being paid was the gravy. Now, at a certain point, you become like, no, no, I actually want to get paid. But I think very much starting out, you accepting that there's a measure of just roughing it to get what you
Yeah.
need and making sure that you really extract every bit of value from every experience, and when I went into this, I'd say I'm quite shy. I wouldn't necessarily want to talk to strangers and stuff, but I realized very early on that you've got to put yourself in front of people and say, this is who I am and this is what I want to learn from you. And I'm never very good at saying, can you be my mentor? But my God, I would be like studying people's moves and asking them questions
Yeah.
and really gathering that information. But yeah, as you say, breaking down the steps and figuring out what you need to take from it is, I think, hugely important.
But I think that also says so much about you that whilst you wouldn't necessarily want to ask somebody to be your mentor, you are still researching hard on that. And whereas, again, I think a lot of people would say, oh, well, I don't have a mentor. I don't have anyone to advise me. So I'm stuck.
Yeah.
There's a
No,
difference, You're like,
yeah.
okay, I don't feel that comfortable asking, but I will get as much out of my own research into that person as I can.
You've got to do your homework. And I love a curriculum. I always say this, like I had a pandemic curriculum, which is I create a little syllabus for myself. This is what I need to learn. How am I going to learn it? And I do think you create your own curriculum, whether or not you have actual mentors, whether or not, you have people who are close to you, you can just pick and choose. Even professionally,
Wow.
I always had a sense in which, what am I trying to learn now? And it's like, I'd been a writer for a long while, but TV, but I hadn't written a film. So I was like, okay, great. How are we going to do that? What courses am I going to do? What screenplays am I going to read? So I'm very much a big proponent of like, create your own curriculum. Who do you need to talk to? It's not who you know, it's who you get to know. And whether you can get to them directly or whether you can get to them by just reading every single interview that they've ever written or they've ever
Yeah.
done. I also think the thing about mentorship is there's different kinds of mentors. I would say a lot of the people I learned the most from were my peers. They weren't someone who was already there. They were the people like, I came up with a cohort of writer directors, but like, a really good friend, but also she started as a professional friend, was Destiny Akaraga. She's like, a British Nigerian woman, BAFTA winning director, but she directed my first television screenplay original. And we kind of grew up together in the industry and we were, I think building that community of peers and your cohort who you're learning from. And again, that's build your skill set. It opens up your understanding of the business. So I think you have to just be very bullish about this is what I want to achieve. And by hook or crook, you've got to learn the things to barge your way in, kick your way in to get that seat at the table.
Yeah. And also, I love that because doing learning and, as you say, almost getting like a mentorship, if you like, or mentorship-esque experience from your peers, it's so much more tangible if you are
Yeah.
all in a similar place in your careers. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
their learnings are so much closer to what
Yeah, there's a
yours
real
would be.
relevance. It's that thing of like, sure, you can try and like slide into the DMs of some Hollywood actor, but that's not where you are. And in all probability, it's very hard. What can they tangibly do for you? And also, what can you tangibly do for them? I think, again,
Yeah.
it's always understanding that mentorship is altruistic, but it's also transactional. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure what you're gonna give to like your A-lister, but if you're working with a peer and you're a writer and she's a director and you're both new and can't get in, then you make something together. She gets a script, you get a director, you both have a film. So I think it's always about thinking these things, all relationships. I think it's something I feel is really important to us, that all relationships are, they're a dance, and often people are like, I want this. You can't always want. But what are you giving? What do you bring to the table? And if you're just constantly draining from people and not giving anything back, that also attaches to who you are and your reputation and how much time people want to spend with you, how much time people want to give to you, because, they need, I think everyone's human. Everyone wants something from it's a transaction. I don't mean that in a negative way, but that's the sense in which it's a dance. So I feel like you want mentoring, but also what are you bringing to the table as well?
Really good. And all of that forces you to face what you are bringing, your own value, your like, what is it? And understanding that, as you say, it's not transactional, but it is a dance of sorts. Like, if I think of who I would give mentorship to right now, it would probably only be somebody who I felt did not have access to whatever and was a real grafter. And I'd be like, okay, cool. Let's provide some opportunity here if I can. But that's me, seeing desire in somebody, that effort that they've made, that work that they've put in, and to give that. Do you know what I mean? That's what I feel like openly and happily do.
No, because we're all human, and there's an opportunity cost to everything. If I give up 2 hours of my time to mentor someone, that's 2 hours I'm not writing, 2 hours I'm not in the gym, 2 hours I'm not spending with my kid. So I think it's very important for the young entrants coming in who are looking for those opportunities to understand that you can't show up and say, here I am. So what have you done? Often I will say to someone, send me your script. And it's, if you want to be a writer, where's your script? Because I can read that in an hour and say,
okay,
so
you're not playing.
No, it's true. Because I think that's the thing though, like all these big dreams are only as real and tangible as the work you've put in. And it's always interesting in telling who gets me that script within a week and who doesn't, because there is no magic wand. One of my favorites, I don't know what, no one is coming to save you. Really?
Well, listen. Yeah, my brother beats me down with that saying every single time.
It's so real, but no one is coming to save you. There are moments where there's this kind of synchronicity where the hard work you've done meets with the luck, meets with an almost magical moment. And you're like, but all of it, you can never really capitalize on any of these things if you haven't done the work. I think about my first American job. I'd been working in the UK. It was incredibly difficult to progress at a point where, as is now, very few women got original shows greenlit, and certainly very few Black women. So I was hitting all those cement ceilings, basically. And that could have been a time, and I did have those moments where I was like, oh my God, so despondent. Should I go and become a lawyer? Should I just give up on this? But irrespective of all that kind of mental spiraling, I kept writing. And that was hugely important because when I had this amazing synchronicity, coalescing of opportunities to get onto How to Get Away with Murder, which was a legal show based in Los Angeles, the legal script I'd written when I was had no work was what got me that job. So it's but that job, if I'd had that opportunity and had no new script, had no great new script, I wouldn't have been able to convert that into a win, into a job offer. So I do feel like it's often we spend time in the dreams. And I was this person a little bit. You're like, God, if only I could get into those right rooms with that big A-list and tell them my film. Great. But people don't think beyond I was in an elevator and I pitched him, okay, where's the script? If you're Spielberg, you're Jordan Peele, if he said, give me the script, do you have it? Are you ready?
Yes.
Stay ready. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. You are not playing. And like I say, my brother, he's just like, and to be fair, he's not said it to me in a long time. But he's like, Joslyn, no one's coming to save you. And now you're like, Oh, okay, got it. Right. I just have
That
to
I
get
say
on
it
with
to
it, I
myself
guess.
constantly. Yeah, no, I have to remind
You're
myself,
like,
because sometimes it's like, well, but it's an important one, because it gives you, once you get past how confronting and bracing that statement is, it's a great reminder to control what you can control.
yeah,
What is within your power, because you can't single-handedly change a lot of things, but what you
yeah,
can control is whether you get up at 5 a.m. to do some writing before work, whether you like watch all those obscure French films that you love so you can write your own obscure little indie movie. But very much leaning and focusing on the things you can do, I think often serves one better than
yeah.
worrying about the things you don't have access to or the people you don't know yet.
Yes, I love that so much. You mentioned time to work out. You mentioned time with your little one. Now, we very originally met through movement, through Nike Training Club.
Yes.
I don't know how long
Complete.
ago that was. You've made me feel better by always saying you can't remember this person's name. I often, when I'm speaking to people on this podcast, and I'm like, when did we first meet? I can't remember. They're like, I know exactly when it was, and I'm like, oh gosh,
No,
I
do you
can't
know,
remember.
I feel like we met right after the Olympics, the London Olympics, because I'd lived in New
Okay,
York for a year and I came back Olympic year, so 2012. And then I
right.
think that was when, I moved to East London, that whole period where I think there was just that kind of amazing atmosphere. And I think Nike started doing run clubs and they started doing
Yeah,
training. And, I was a sprinter at school. I was a 4x100 girl who took the baton for the last leg. I've
amazing,
always been a sporty
amazing.
person.
Yeah.
But I loved the way, I think I was obsessed with my fuel band. There was a Nike fuel band that everyone
Yes,
had.
the
And we were like,
fuel band. My
but yeah, so we
goodness.
met through that. And I met so many amazing people who I'm still in touch with and friends with. And, I credit that experience with like, again, it's about who you surround yourself with, which we're kind of talking about. It's like
Yes.
what you do. But I felt so surrounded by really smart women and men actually when I started to do the run club. So much so that I remember we all as a group went to watch Mo Farah run the marathon. Like he did London Marathon, and we watched it around Limehouse. And then everyone said,
Yeah.
"We're doing a marathon," and I was like, "Sure." I mean, I basically
Yeah.
run like 13 seconds for 100 meters, but you're like, okay, I'm gonna. But I did. I
Yeah.
ran
Let me
Paris
just, yeah.
Marathon, so I think that's how we met, and I think it's. And obviously, I'm still obsessed with you because I'm like always on like I was talking about my treadmill, doing the boot camps on Peloton. But movement is so important. It's just I took up. I mean, it doesn't. For me, it feels perfectly. It makes perfect sense that the year I ran a marathon was also the year I got my first American job and got my first American visa, because
Right.
it'd been a really tough few years. Like I said, I was like, I'd written on EastEnders and Casualty and Hobby, but the phone stopped ringing, and you're like, will I ever make it? I'd been graduated from university for like almost a decade at that point, and you're like, I've had some highs, but it's been more lows. Should I just quit on this dream and go and become a lawyer? And so around that whole point, I just took up running, with the run club, but then I'll do Sunday. And I think mentally just put me in this place of the kind of one step, one step, one step, one step, one step. And you go from being able
Yes.
to do 5K to doing the like Nike women's 10K around Victoria Park. And I ran this marathon, lost a toenail. And
Amazing.
but that about a few months later, I just said, okay, cool. You're going to go to Los Angeles for 10 weeks and you're either going to come back with a job or an agent or a manager, or you come back to London and become a lawyer. But that big swing, I think, came. I remember crossing the line at Paris Marathon and being like, you can't kill me now, because I'd done something that I did not in any way believe I could do.
Yes.
Like I ran for 5 hours. I did not believe that I could
Wow.
ever do that. So I think that
Yeah.
sense of reminding yourself what you're capable of, and sport training is a very easy win in your day, and the cumulative impact of that, I think, really put me. I mean, I went to LA with this kind of no toenail, but very much like I can do this, and I did. I came back with a
Yeah.
job offer from Shondaland, so I do. I have such good memories. I miss that old crowd actually, in terms of just
Yeah.
but baby's
Yeah.
life, everyone moves on, and you're sort of like trying to find that same cohort really again.
Yeah, and it's when you said, looking back on just there were so many brilliant, people we were surrounded by at that time, and it was just this really natural, organic thing of movement that brought everybody together, and through just this light encouragement from friends and colleagues to just go, yeah, go for that, give it a go, and that you've made that link to completing the marathon and that being quite a turning point for your career as well is
Yeah.
huge. And that is, as you know, my obsession with movement, that you learn to break things down and achieve bit by bit.
Yeah.
And that is something that nobody else, that's something you get to own then and inform how you approach other things. And then finally, you've got a little tiny person in your life.
Yes. She's very much a person. She's 11 months old. She's going to be one soon. And yeah, it's been a just incredible year, so challenging, beyond challenging. I think about all the mums I've known, and I've not realized, it's a miracle anyone keeps it together, honestly. But no, it's been an amazing year. But again, it's also the redefining what your life is, what you want, what your goals and priorities are. I feel quite grateful that I'm sort of slightly older, so I have a very clear sense of what's important to me. And, we're talking before about hustle culture and how prevalent that is. And I work very hard, and at points I've worked very hard. But I think it's very important to not get sucked into this idea that you've got to be on all the time, because I think it's dangerous. Your health is important, and working yourself to death. And there's a great article this journalist talked about, as a black woman in the field she was in, and that constant sense of being excellent black woman, strong black woman. And she just said, if you work like an animal, they will treat you like an animal. No one is going to tell you to stop. So it's very much, again, in your control. So I think my daughter has very much forced that upon me as well, which is boundaries, separation of church and state. You can't just be working into the night. I mean, sometimes you have to, but I'm not in production right now. So it's sure, you can work till 2, but when she wakes up at 3 a.m. for a feed, it is not giving yourself. So, I think boundaries and limits, and also the importance of having a slightly more balanced life in terms of just, it's not just work, it's also another person you're keeping alive. So I think it's actually been good for me, really, in terms of not just being a little bit too work focused, professional stuff.
Gosh, that resonates so much, because I love my work and I love to work. And, often people have said to me, some of my colleagues now, I don't know how you do this with, 2 little ones, and my boys are now, 6 and 10. They are that forced rest. They are that when I'm with them, I cannot be deep in. I'm not working well then, and I'm not being present with them then. And so they force that rest in the most positive way.
No,
so
completely.
So wonderful, so wonderful. And then my final piece. This podcast is called Listen Loudly, because I believe that you need to listen loudly to yourself in order to be heard by others. Can you think back on a time when you did that?
I would say I'm not great at it, actually, in the sense of I'm very good at having a goal or an ambition, and I plot my way to it, and I get very tunnel vision, and I'm just laser focused on that thing. And sometimes, the thing about big dreams that take a minute to achieve is, by the time you achieve them, you're kind of a different person from the person who started that, And so that was one of the things that kept happening. I'd be so focused on the thing, I get to the thing, and you're like, okay, And so I think the pandemic was a really, really, really good corrector for me, because I was always going. There's always the next opportunity. I had a therapist who called it the hedonic hamster wheel, which is I'm obsessed with the highs, you know, the
Right.
hedonism of chasing the highs. So, but you know, if
Yes.
you're constantly, you know, it's the same as, you know, whether it's exercise or weight loss, where you're like, when I'm this size, I will be happy. When I'm, you know, it's like when I'm,
Yes.
you know, it was like when I get on this project or when I work with this producer. And it was like, I always just kicked the can so that I never, and so the hedonic hamster wheel, I kept thinking about that. And also that sense in which sometimes you do have to check in with yourself, even if you've got a big goal. Am I still in alignment? Is the
Yeah.
person I am now still the person who wanted this a year ago? And it is okay to
Mm.
change. It's okay to pivot. It's okay to say, the person who wanted this is slightly different from who I am now. Let's move away. So I think the pandemic
Mm.
was incredibly important because I've been working back to back for almost 5 years. You know, I'd gone from show to show, production to production. And I was in
Yeah.
New York when things started to kick off. I was working on Inventing Anna. And then I came back to Los Angeles and then we locked down. And I was in my apartment for like, and it was just that quiet. And weirdly, there was nothing to listen to but yourself because if you put on the TV, it was just like
Mm.
horror. And so I
Yeah.
think that was very, very, it kind of altered my life in a very important way. I don't know if I would be quite where I am right now. And so what I've taken from that, though, is you have to build in the time to check in with yourself. You have to build in the
Mm.
time to say, okay, this is what I'm doing and why am I doing it? What is the why? And so I completely agree with you in terms of you've got to really listen loudly. You've got to factor in how you're changing, how you're evolving, how what you want is evolving.
Mm.
And also, though, but a big part of that was also understanding that when you listen to yourself and are very clear about your needs and your wants and articulating those, not everyone wants to hear it. Not everyone wants to hear that. And
Mm.
that's perfectly fine. But at least you're
Mm.
clear about what you want and you can make that strategic decision about, am I going to enforce this now or am I going to wait a little bit? But knowing what you think is really important, that way you can have a position on and a way to defend that potentially. But not everyone's going to want to hear it, and not everyone's, you know, not everyone wants to hear you change. And not, you know, you know,
Yes.
I've run 2 shows now, and you get to a point where you're like, you're in a slightly, you're, you know, I always talk about poacher turned gamekeeper. You're one of the gang, and then you're the hiring person, you're the firing person, and you have
Mm.
to really be very clear about those challenges, but also listening to what is my value system, how do I want to run this set or this production, and try to like do that as effectively and fairly as possible in alignment with what you, how you want the world to work as well, I guess.
And that's quite a big transition and a big jump, as you say, going from the person who is doing what they're asked to the person who's then, you know,
Yeah,
running the
yeah,
show, and how
completely.
you show up,
Yes,
because many people may have seen you transition from one to the other and have their
yeah,
own expectation and comfort level
yes.
of what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think anyone really, but I do think often when women transition into leadership roles, when black women transition into leadership roles, there there are some defined ideas about how you should be and how grateful you need to be,
Mm.
and you know, and
Yeah.
I don't have much time for that. But I think the key thing for me was when you have those opportunities. You know, I made Riches. We filmed in London, and
Mm.
it was very important for me to create a set of the kind that I didn't see often enough. So I had black
Yeah.
directors, I had black HODs. There were
Yeah.
multiple women on the various camera teams. I walked onto that
Yeah.
set and I did not feel as though I didn't belong there. And I think
Mm.
at best, what you can do is when you have the power to, you know, to make a change, or even just to put into action the things you've talked about, then you do. And I'm very
Yes.
proud of the work we did to do that, to make it, you know, a very diverse and inclusive production and set. But
Mm.
yeah, it's leadership is a really interesting thing because it brings up all kinds of things in yourself, and it goes back to that thing about like external validation versus what needs to get done versus who are you really and what kind of a leader do you want
Yeah.
to be. But it is always about doing that check in, doing that work to figure out okay, how am I going to show up today? And will that serve me as well as the people I'm working with?
Yeah, and as you describe it, it's a great responsibility, as you say, to make sure that that set was one in which you would feel comfortable being on, but also it's and to that some people might think that that's a level of pressure, but actually you did that because it felt right for you to do. So I often think about pressures and responsibilities, but fundamentally you are still coming back to what is important for you to do.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
therefore there's a level of ease with that with the execution of that responsibility.
Yeah, no, completely. For me, it was important to not have just been talking about this stuff, to not have been talking about
Yes.
inequalities and talking about
Yes.
obstacles and talking about why there are not enough black lead directors or women on the
Yeah.
camera team and stuff. It was very important to me to like have the courage of my convictions. I constantly question why other shows don't have those things. It's not, I'm very, especially in my industry, I don't think people of color, women, black people, we don't need schemes. We need to be hired to do the jobs that we can do so I think it was important for me to not have lots of schemes and training schemes, to say, no, that's the job. And this is the person who's going to do it. And they're brilliant at it. And they have they have a great CV, and it shouldn't be the case that black British people in film and television have to go to America to get work and to get the respect. So I felt, is it a bit of pressure? Maybe, but not really, because you're just like, I think when people say, oh, it's hard to find, I'm like, where are you looking? People are there. And it's about your own echo chamber. And it's nobody's responsibility to broaden your echo chamber. So for me, it was just like, there were directors whose work I'd seen and been eager to work with. I try to keep a note. I try to, just as you say, just act on what I've said was important to me.
Yeah. Because otherwise it's just words then, isn't it? And
it really is just
saying what people will nod and smile and go, oh yeah, me too, same. But yes, you're actually actioning it. So,
when you're there, you have to, right? Otherwise, what was the point to all of that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh my gosh, Abby, thank you so much. You've reinforced all of my beliefs around just the process of doing your own best work. Before we sat down to record, or ahead of us pressing record, I was already feeling emotional, as I said to you, just sitting down and we had a quick catch up, and I was just like, because I just think it's such a breath of fresh air to hear the slow process of self-reflection and actioning and all of that. To me, it's just magical. And I wish more people did it. So thank you
it's
so
a learning process, but thank you so much for having me. It's been really good to sort of reflect and think on. And that link between movement and work it's kind of it's a big one. I was telling you, I'm obsessed with buying my new treadmill so I can get back to my running.
Get that tread.
Oh my god! But no, it's been really lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, you too, my love. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And now that you're in London, I might see you soon.
Yes, for sure. Will do. Take care.
Lots of love, my darling.
Ciao, ciao. Okay.